You're listening to the Future Tech Health Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Until I reached age 40, I never realized the obvious, that we all have medical issues, or we at least have a family member or close relation that had, has, or will have them in the future. Medicine and biological systems are the final frontier. Until we've conquered death, figured out how life began, cured cancer, and understood our purpose in the universe, there's a heck of a lot to talk about when it comes to our health. Future Tech Health means I'll be covering futuristic topics that are actually already in clinical trials, or even starting to appear on shelves or by prescription, or available for your own use. We dive deep into stem cells, CRISPR-Cas9, the science of sleep, epigenetics, medical testing, cancer, ketogenic diets, stem cells, aging, regenerative medicine, and more. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a serious medical problem. Remember, however, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you enjoy the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and share it with friends. Thank you. Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Future Tech Health Podcast, and I have Niny Rao. She's an associate professor of chemistry at Thomas Jefferson University. We're going to be talking about cold brew coffee and the acidity and antioxidant activity of it, and the chemistry of coffee. Since I love coffee, and I'm sure listeners do too, it'll be a great call. So, Niny, thank you for coming.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So, how did you probably have a dream job? How did you become a professor of coffee? Essentially.
Well, it's one of those spontaneous, serendipity moments, because I was actually at a chemistry conference in San Diego, and I was, for all conferences before the morning session, you have to get a cup of coffee. And I walked into one of the coffee store, and they had cold brew coffee. I've never heard of that before, so of course I have to try it. And then I tried it. I said, okay, this is pretty good. And I looked up exactly how they were made. And I thought, maybe I could do it myself. And one thing led to another. I started working the chemistry behind it. So the information was not available in terms of how to brew a good cup of cold brew coffee. I stumbled on it, and I started working on it. And it's so interesting, a lot of history going on for cold brew coffee. I should do it.
Well, just for listeners, how do you make cold brew coffee? And let's go over maybe lightly what happens chemically, and then we'll go deeper after that.
Okay, so cold brew coffee is very similarly brewed as a French press. Nowadays on the market, there are a lot of apparatus or setup that you can buy, and basically involves submerging coffee grind in either cold water in the refrigerator or room temperature water over the counter. The key for cold brew coffee is that it is brewed for over 8, 10, 12, sometimes even 48 hours, depend on the brewer. So it is slow, takes time, and very often a lot of drinkers prefer cold brew coffee because they feel like they have a lower. So that's why. And for the summertime, it's very people like it.
Where does acidity come from, or the perception of it when you're brewing coffee?
Coffee has, as a natural product, coffee has a lot of organic acid in itself. So when you extract the compounds out of the coffee, and then the acids will be out into the coffee brew, and that is where the acidity comes from.
So what controls the amount of acidity? How do you know if the coffee's going to be good or is it going to be like, I've had, for instance, you'll probably be horrified by the story, but in college, I had a friend that was really cheap. So he would brew coffee for us, and he would keep the grounds in the coffee maker, and then he'd sprinkle on like a very little bit of an extra layer, and he would brew it again through the same grind. And man, it was so sour, and it was like, but it was unbelievably caffeinated for some reason.
So there are a lot of one of the things that controls acidity, where you get your coffee from. What kind of coffee are you brewing? So at a higher altitude, the berries, the coffee berry tend to have a higher acidity, it's more fruity. Whereas as a lower altitude, you tend to have less acid but more caffeine. So there are the region of the coffee is important, and the other one is the way that it's brewed. For any coffee drinker, if you drink espresso versus americano versus a filter coffee, and they all taste different because they are brewed differently. That different brewing technique will extract different amount of compounds out of the coffee. So that's another indicator where whether the coffee is acidic or not. The third one is the temperature. Water temperature plays a part in how much the chemicals can be extracted from the coffee. The higher the temperature, usually the more stuff that's extracted. So very often you hear people saying we don't use boiling water, we use a little bit less than boiling. It tastes good. So to some people that temperature adjustment. So there are a lot of ways.
So the McDonald's coffee that burned that lady years ago, not only was it like ridiculously hot, but it probably tasted gross and it burned her.
I'm not going to comment on other people's brewing, but I prefer my coffee brewed at just about 200 degrees rather than boiling. So I like my coffee a little bit, lower in temperature.
So what's your goal? Are you trying to? Well, actually, let me back up and ask a different question. If you have an inferior bean, you're starting with a coffee that, for whatever reason, you deem it not to be very good. Is there any way of rescuing it and making it delicious? Or are you doomed and the starting bean is really what controls the process?
There are a lot of ways to rescue coffee. I'm not an expert on rescuing coffee. Just to tie into your future question. My goal is to provide home brewers with information so that they can adjust their coffee brewing at home to suit their taste. So everybody has a very different. The taste itself is very simple. So everybody will. A good cup of coffee to someone might be very. So the goal is if you understand how the process works, we could provide the home brewers with some information about the chemistry in coffee, brewing coffee. Maybe they can tweak their method that they can a cup that is tasty to them.
So what are some of the factors that really modulate the flavor profile? What have you found?
We never really tested flavor profile, but according one of the biggest one is again temperature. And the flavor profile is also very distinct from different regions of. The other factor that dictates flavor is roast. Lighter roast and darker roast was very different. And again, that is a very subjective aspect of coffee. What do you expect your coffee, right? I like my coffees a little bit more refreshing rather than that nutty, smoky flavor. So I prefer. And then of all the medium roasts I've tasted, there's one from actually one of my local roasters that is from Mexico, and that is absolutely wonderful. I've tasted other roasts from the same roaster, but this is my favorite. So it's very much subjective.
So even going back to temperature, have you tried ramping up the temperature through a brew, pulsing it high low? Bringing it down a lot near the end. I mean, I would think that would modulate things a lot, right?
It will be, and the problem with one of the modulation is going to be very hard because coffee brewing is such a fast process. If you think about it, you can do a pour over in a few minutes. And then espresso is literally less than a minute or maybe a minute. So to modulate temperature in that short period of time is a little bit difficult. So very often people try to find a middle ground to control the temperature, whether they, and then not to mention the fact that when you brew coffee, because your coffee grind very often is room temperature, your water is hot. When the water hits the grind, the temperature is going to change. So through that, you can modulate the brewing process, but it is very finicky and then it's very hard to control. So this is why everybody's coffee will be different. Morning one might taste a little bit different than the evening, and even if you same everything, one day it might be a little bit different.
Is it because of temperature or because of humidity too? Like how about the ambient humidity?
Oh, everything. Humidity will change because you already have moisture being absorbed into the coffee grind. That may affect the extraction process. There are And also the humidity might change the bean flavor before you before the grinding. So and we haven't even talked about grinds yet. So there are a lot of factors that a brewer really need to take into consideration. Most people remember, oh, I want it roast. Roast is a big thing. Everybody understands light, medium, dark. And if you talk to a lot of coffee connoisseur, they start talking about water temperature. And then there's coffee grind, the size of the grind that matters because surface area matters. And then if you're talking about I went to one of the seminars about how to brew coffee from a professional barista, and he mentioned how much coffee grind versus how much water. That ratio is also going to affect how much the taste of coffee. So we're just listing the obvious variables that people have studied, and there are others that in the literature that home brewers probably never thought of, but people think that might be interesting.
So what's your particular area of studies? There's so many variables and things you could do. What's your goal?
Funny you asked. So what I'm focusing on are two things. Number one is there are two types of chemicals every coffee paper tend to report on. Number one is caffeine. How much caffeine are you getting from the coffee? Number two is a type of antioxidant compound called chlorogenic acid. Coffee has a lot of chlorogenic acid naturally, and it is a beneficial compound in the sense that it is antioxidant. It basically stops scavenge free radicals that may be damaging to our health, and that is also because it's so prevalent in coffee. A lot of research are focusing on how this compound changed through different conditions in the brewing process. So I I focus on that. And then the third one would be the acidity and antioxidant aspect of coffee. We can look at overall antioxidant level in brewed coffee. And that because people drink coffee because they think not only for caffeinated reasons, but they also wanted to drink coffee for health benefits because coffee has a lot of antioxidants. And we wanted to look into if you start varying some of the variables, how do these variables affect the antioxidant level in coffee? And then there are other physical attributes, for example, pH and acidity, which we're not really talking about taste, but it can relate to how we perceive coffee's taste. So these are the areas that I'm focusing. So and also because I involve my undergraduate students, and these attributes are very easily accessible to my undergraduate student in terms of understanding why they wanted to, the chemistry in coffee.
What about the things that people add to coffee? Is there anything that people add that really can alter it? The type of milk, cinnamon, chocolate, sugar.
Anything, yeah, absolutely. Anything you add to coffee is going to alter the chemistry. I haven't spent a lot of research on the additives, but from general literature, anything you add will basically change the taste because things will react. Things will, especially in hot coffee, and then introducing other chemicals will also maybe enhance the flavor or maybe allow you to taste things differently. So, for example, the lipids, the fat in the cream will allow you to taste different aspect of coffee that you may not taste as a black coffee.
Okay, I gotcha. Have you guys tried to make like a very unusual coffee in the lab? A super antioxidant one, or one that has like very unusual taste or properties by experimentation?
No, I am not. I'm such a purist when it comes to coffee. I try not to deviate from the traditional way of brewing it. The most we would do is we may roast the beans to very dark and then brew a regular cup of coffee and see what it's like. So we haven't created anything new yet. We're just trying to benchmark and analyze the existing coffee that we can brew in the lab.
Well, why not? If you do something that's very unusual, then you can put your name on it. Niny Rao brew and sell it and something like that. Subsidize your research. I think you should go to the extremes and make all kinds of cool stuff.
Oh, I know, and I just feel, I personally, I feel that there's so much that we don't know, and I always feel like I should understand everything first before I move to the next thing. So I'm still trying to go down the rabbit hole about what is going on in just simple cup of coffee, and there's so many things that we don't understand.
I think you should open up your own coffee lab with beakers that you serve the coffee in, and again, it has your special like scientific recipes or things like that on it.
I mean, it doesn't take much for me to get some beakers to drink coffee. I think I do have a mug that is made out of a beaker, which is one of my favorite mugs.
Oh, well, for customers, you could have a big pipette or like one of those titrating vessels, and you could titrate the milk in, and you could have chemistry recipes. And it's a cool place to go.
Oh, yeah, it would be very, very fun, and I this is a wonderful thing. I might do that in my lab.
There you go. So back to your research. So what surprising or interesting things are you seeing just in your your run of the mill like cold brew?
One of the things we saw that we thought that was quite interesting is that the pH between hot and cold, to be honest, they're about the same. When we say that is we have this perception of cold brew is slightly less acidic than hot brew. If we look at the pH values, which is the indicator for acidity, a common indicator for acidity, we find that our hot brew coffee and cold brew coffee tend to have values that are within range. What I mean by that is, yes, there's variation. We're talking about maybe 5.1 versus 5.05. So the question is, can we, consumers, taste the difference? Probably not, but maybe this small difference will affect our body, but we're not tasting it. So these are some of the things we found that's interesting. The other one that we found that's interesting is that hot brew coffee actually has more antioxidant than cold brew coffee. So
one quick question on the pH, like why not have people drink coffees of different pHs and then test their blood for levels of caffeine or something an hour later and see if that affects absorption of caffeine or something.
So the pH is it's probably not going to affect the absorption of caffeine. What the pH level would affect how stomach, one of the how your digestive system react. A lot of patients with GI tract disorders or like acid reflux are recommended to drink cold brew coffee. There's just not enough study to say that cold brew coffee actually is better than hot brew coffee for those who have acid. And we are only reporting some of the initial studies we've done on pH and total acidity, hoping this will spark further studies from the medical community to investigate the effect of cold brew coffee on those who have acid reflux or other kind of GI tract disorders.
Well, the thing of the body wants to be at a neutral pH, the less burden it has by drinking a low pH coffee, the easier it'll be to digest. But that's just an assumption.
Yes, and everybody's body kind of works a little bit differently, and also your stomach is actually a very acidic environment, but there is really no and then there are some studies that said that coffee will trigger heartburn and whatnot, but it's just very inconclusive. So we hope that our study can provide some more info, utilize to even more extensive research on this topic.
So all right, the pH doesn't differ very much from hot or cold brew. I don't know, are there other kinds of coffee like Turkish coffee or other ways of brewing that really create a very, very different type of coffee?
There are different brewing methods would definitely create different type of coffee. Our study focused on French press method. which is the closest to cold brew method. Again, it involves coffee grind being submerged in water. For cold brew, we're talking about 7, 10, 24 hours. For hot brew, we're talking about 6 minutes tops. And we're doing everything to the extreme. So we are brewing for the hot brew coffee. We are brewing the coffee a little bit longer than normal, and we're using boiling water. Not everybody would do that, but we thought this will guarantee we get everything out of the coffee grind as much as possible in the brew setting. So, and that's when we discovered that if you use the hot method, you actually will get a little bit more antioxidant out of the coffee than the cold brew method.
Is there a trade-off? Is there anything you don't get or you get too much of by doing that?
Yes, there is a trade-off. I know one of the things we saw from even an earlier paper is that when you are doing cold brew, and because you're exposing the coffee grind to water for a long period of time, you get a little bit more caffeine, especially for if you use a larger like grind, like coarse grind. You actually do get a little bit more caffeine out of it. So that's great. And the other thing people have reported, and we are in the process of coming this, is the cold brew coffee tend to have less bitter taste. So there are a lot of compounds that contribute to the bitter taste, and we're hoping to look into exactly a couple of them and have a see on whether the cold brew coffee really has less bitter compound hot brew.
Well, from what I've heard, I mean, coffee seems to vary very, big time in the amount of caffeine it has, and even decaf too. Have you observed that?
Yes, we did. Depend on the region. We have very different caffeine concentration, and we did one of our early studies we used Kona coffee, and then from dark and cold we found that the caffeine concentration actually varied a little bit, and for our last study, we didn't really focus on caffeine concentration. We only did antioxidant activities, and then from region to region, it varies. So regionality actually do show up in the chemistry profiling of coffee.
Yeah, why would, for instance, decaf, from what I've read, it can vary tremendously on the amount of caffeine. Why would that be the case? Why wouldn't that process strip it all out or 99% of it out?
It depends on the process itself, and it also depends on where the bean's from. And if you come to source a bean that is extremely high in caffeine content, and then the process may not be effective. And I am not familiar with the decaf process, so I don't want to comment too much on it. But I would imagine that it just depends on the operation itself and then who's doing it, and it's going to vary.
Okay. Is there a world record of the most caffeinated bean out there that you know of?
I don't know anything that is naturally occurring, but I do know there are some beans who have been processed, and then that has quite a bit of caffeine, and the brand name escaped me, and I want to say that it's from New York. The company's from New York, and let me see if I can find. I honestly, somehow that name, the name escaped me. So if I could think of it, and I think one of them is called Death Wish, and there's another one that the one that's not the one I was thinking, and then but they are
called depleted adrenal glands, adrenal killer.
but yeah, so that's one of the coffee that has very high caffeine content. I haven't tested yet. I just know that I've heard the brand name, and then they boast the fact that the coffee is potent.
All right. Any other interesting curiosities in the coffee world that you've run into?
So as I said, I'm a traditionalist, and I tend to go to the more of a mainstream type of coffee. But there are certain regions of coffee that I wasn't aware of. So after I started my coffee research, friends from overseas would tell me, "Oh, we grow coffee in different regions," and one of them that shocked me was Taiwan. One of my friend who lives in Taiwan, posted quite a few articles about how Taiwan's coffee industry is booming, and it's really interesting because that's not a region that you associate with coffee, but yet they're growing coffee. It's within the climate of growing coffee. It's just not a big coffee growing region, and I just thought it's so interesting that Taiwan is has a very vibrant coffee scene and coffee growing
Okay.
activity.
What makes a really good coffee versus like a disgusting one? You
Um,
know?
I don't. And all I know from all the conversations I've had with friends and colleagues is coffee is very subjective. What you
Hmm.
love is what you love. And if you deviate from what you love, and you may not like it. There are coffee I've tasted that people told me, oh, it's the best coffee in the world. And I kind of like, yes, it's nice, but it's not my type of coffee. Whereas my coffee to me is great. When I give it to other people, they were like, eh. So it's I there is no I personally don't think there's a universal standard in terms of coffee.
Hmm.
But I would say just talk to people and see what they like, and then experiment and then try things. Maybe you discover something that you never thought before to try before. But it is very hard to pin down like what is the best coffee.
Okay. Yeah. No, I was just curious if there's like a standard or if you can correlate. At least if most people seem to like this coffee and most people seem to hate this other one, what's the difference there? Maybe you'd be able to do an experiment.
There are human subject is very hard but there are some standards in terms of extraction. There are some standards in terms of like the standard of beans, like the size of the beans. When growers sort the beans out, there are standards for defective beans and whatnot. And there are some studies out there in the scientific community about how to use these beans that might be defective, whether it's a size or it's a color or for whatever reason, and then maybe make something out of it. So there are standards, and very often consumers have a different standard than everybody else.
What about microbes? I heard of this coffee mold. Is there molds or fungi or yeast or bacteria that are commensal with coffee? And do those influence the brewing? And have you studied? Is anyone studying that?
Not to my knowledge. There are some concerns about coffee brewing, especially in the cold brew community. There are some studies so the one of the studies from that I came across tested the survivability of various microbes in coffee. And we're talking about cold brew coffee. Hot brew coffees are not as concerning because the high temperature tend to pretty much sterilize it. Whereas cold brew coffee, you are talking about low temperature, moisture, and it is possible that microbes can grow in coffee. So based on that particular study, I believe they tested common ones like E. coli and what is a salmonella and some others, and they are not very
E. coli.
yeah E. coli bacteria. And then the cold brew coffee doesn't it's not a very friendly environment to for microbes, at least for bacteria. But that I don't think I came across any mold studies yet. I also didn't look too closely in the mold. We were looking to thinking about more of a microbial bacteria situation.
Okay, yeah. I've had like stale coffee or coffee that's gone stale. So I wonder like what's happening, what's oxidizing over time.
So
I guess there's so many things.
There are so many things that's being oxidized over time. One of them could be chlorogenic acids. They are abundant, but they are very easily oxidized. So with exposure to air, it can lose its potency or just being oxidized in something else. The other chemicals, some of the volatile compounds that basically make up the smell of coffee. As you expose to air for a longer period of time, obviously they're volatile, so they will escape into the air. The coffee doesn't smell or taste as good because the flavors are gone.
Yeah.
So all these, so that's why you should really store coffee in the freezer, and because it minimizes the escape, the volatile compound escaping from the from the coffee, and and then also it
Okay.
lasts a little bit longer. And there was actually another study in that basically did a study on how you should grind your, and the study found that if you freeze your beans, the coffee grind becomes a little bit more uniform, and then it's
Oh.
better for brewing coffee. So that was
The
that was
fraction
the
fracture
yeah.
into like more similar
Yeah.
sized pieces.
Yes. So the more uniform the grind, the better the coffee is going to be, because
Huh.
the extraction, it controls the extraction rate. So if everything has the same surface area, everything's going to come out about the same time. So you don't have grinds that being soaked for too long or not long enough. So there's that aspect of coffee brewing as well. And then there it's just so many. It's mind-boggling that how many variables control the quality of coffee.
No, like at this one coffee place I go to, I swear to God, depending on the barista, the coffee's either going to be good or bad. It's the same everything, but some of them just make it awful. And this one guy, he's my favorite. He always makes it great, and
Yeah,
I can see like the order of what they do. Like they'll pull a shot, and they'll
absolutely.
put it in the cup first, and then ice on it, or the shot and milk together, and then the ice last on top. And it's
Yeah,
weird. I don't know what the guy does. I've asked him, and he just makes it great every time. I don't know. And it's funny, like barista is in a bad mood, they take it out in your coffee and it comes out bad. And I don't know what's happening there either. It's like
yeah.
crazy number of variables.
I don't know. I don't have an answer to that, but I could attest to that because my husband and I make the same coffee. His coffee came out to be much better than mine. So I usually just, I get spoiled. I'd have, a barista at home to make coffee for me, and I enjoy every bit of it.
But if he's in a bad mood, I bet you his coffee is not as good for some reason. You can tell something's wrong with him, right?
Well, in my case, he's always in a good mood.
Oh, good. Oh, you must be a good wife. That's great. It's funny. What my wife does? She makes me like this special coffee drink with all this stuff in it, and she'll make it for me, and she'll give it to me and watch me, and I'll drink it. And sometimes I'm like, "What? What did you do?" And she goes, "What is it? What is it?" And and eventually she'll say, "Oh, well, I ran out of this," or "Oh, I had to do that." Like, and I said, "Why don't you tell me? I always can tell." And I think she likes to like test me and sometimes make it different to see what I'll do.
It is very like we know our coffee. Like there any
Yeah.
I can taste when he sometimes he run out of one bean, and then we have a different bag of beans, and then he'll use that, and then he'll use a mix between the two beans, and I couldn't taste that. And I will ask him, I was like, did you run out of the first beans? And he was like, yeah, I only have the other one around, so I mixed them. I was like, yeah, it doesn't taste right, but it's a good coffee. It just I could taste it different. So
he does the same thing to you. He doesn't tell you, and he waits for you to say.
It's never really like he didn't tell me. He just made me coffee, and I took a sip, and I turned around to him. And said, did you do this? And he was like, yeah. But he's not trying to hide it from me because he knows like I'll be able to figure it out.
I think a similar dynamic is going on. It goes on in millions of households every day.
I'm sure.
Well, very cool. So what's the future of your work? Like, what would be an exciting result for you to have in the next year or two?
We hope to look more in like we wanted to. So the last couple project we worked on was more of a preliminary study, almost because we were the first few research groups that focused on cold brew coffee, and because we weren't, we didn't realize how complex the process is. And there are studies that the experiments we did, it came out great, but I think we wanted to control our experiment even more and then do a little bit more in-depth study on other chemicals in coffee for example, the flavor compound. We wanted to test some of the smaller flavor compounds in coffee, compare the cold and hot brew methods, see if there's difference in the flavor compounds. And then we also wanted to see if there are any other factors that we can control or we can focus on that can give us more insight on how can we brew a better cup of coffee, or at least how can we control our coffee brew so that
Yeah.
we could tweak it to our liking. So we're looking into like how obviously origins of beans, right? Because that's a
Right.
big deal. We could look into how the beans were processed, how they're being grown. All these things are going to affect the final product. So and then how they are brewed. That's cold versus hot, and then if we change the way that the beans are soaked in water, if we have like additional support, like some of the cold brew setup, it's almost like brewing tea. They have a little container in the middle, and then you put grinds in the middle, and then suspend the container, the sieve in
Right.
water.
Yep.
So how would that type of setup differ from a regular mason jar coffee grind water and then soak for a while? What's the difference? We don't know. We wanted to understand it, and then there's another brewing method. I believe some groups already looking into that, but I also wanted to see what are some of the look into more about this particular type of cold brew. So it's a drip method. So you drip cold water onto a bed of coffee grind, and then the water.
Yeah, I've seen that.
You've seen that
huge,
like a beautiful glass setup. Yes, it's gorgeous. And then so how would this process differ from a regular, again, mason jar method, right? So all these little things, there's a lot of creative ways, and people are coming up to enjoy coffee. And as these methods come up, a lot of consumers want to do them at home. And if I could give them some information to base to use, maybe they can refine their home brewing and then be able to enjoy these new creations at home. And that's my ultimate goal.
Okay, that's very cool. So are there any coffee organizations or like coffee summits or conferences, or for people listening, they won't get this far unless they really love coffee. So we're assuming they do, like me and you, but
right.
Like how can they find out more? How can they get into more of the world of coffee and learn about all the intricacies and stuff?
There are some websites that's out there that deals with coffee, and I'm blanking a lot of it because I wasn't expecting this question, to be completely honest.
That's okay.
There's a national coffee. There are a couple international coffee organizations.
But have you seen coffee is big enough of a deal that there's conferences on it?
Oh yeah, there are definitely conferences. Yeah, there's a conference. There's the International Coffee Show. There is
really? Cool.
Global. There's actually a international coffee organization, and and you can go online, and they have expos in September in Tokyo. They have all kinds of coffee. Costa Rica, they have another event, and then Brazil, and there's all over the place. Thailand. So there are a lot of information you can find out about coffee, and it's really readily available. A lot of people are blogging about coffee, and a lot of and one of the local ones for those listening in the States, there's a specialty coffee expo, and that is going to happen in Portland, Oregon in April of 2020. Cool. Yeah.
Do you know what's going on? Okay. Very cool. Excellent. Okay, and Nini, what's the best way for people to find out more about you and your lab? And
they can reach me on Twitter. I do have a Twitter account, and I don't use it often. So my Twitter handle actually is my name, and at Niny Rao.
Niny.
Niny, yes. And so people could reach me that way. And we periodically, I don't have, because we're going through a transition right now, and my website is not up. So hopefully in the next couple months or so, I will actually have my lab website up to provide people with updates about the lab research I'm doing. But everybody is welcome to email me. My email would be nini.rao@jefferson.edu.
All right.
And
well,
yeah. Yeah, so shoot me an email if you have questions. I'll do my best to answer. I'm definitely not a expert in coffee. I'm just starting. I just started this project a couple years ago. I'm so fortunate that I have friends and colleagues so being so supportive, and then also a lot of consumers who love coffee. And then when I go to conference and we have this wonderful conversation about what they like, what they want to know about coffee, it inspires me to like trying to do more and then study, understand more about coffee.
Very good. Well, Niny, thank you for coming on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
You're listening to the Future Tech Health Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Until I reached age 40, I never realized the obvious, that we all have medical issues, or we at least have a family member or close relation that has, or will have them in the future. Medicine and biological systems are the final frontier. Until we've conquered death, figured out how life began, cured cancer, and understood our purpose in the universe, there's a heck of a lot to talk about when it comes to our health. Future Tech Health means I'll be covering futuristic topics that are actually already in clinical trials, or even starting to appear on shelves or by prescription, or available for your own use. We dive deep into stem cells, CRISPR-Cas9, the science of sleep, epigenetics, medical testing, cancer, ketogenic diets, stem cells, aging, regenerative medicine, and more. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a serious medical problem. Remember, however, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and share it with friends. Thank you.